I wanted this movie to have more of an edge to it. I wanted it to have more of a bite. And there's a way to do that while still leaning into the comedy, and yet that just ultimately is not what happened. And so, hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about The Running Man by Richard Bachman. Richard Bachman, who is actually Stephen King publishing under a different name. But it was published in 1982, and I will talk a little bit about the 1987 adaptation directed by Paul Michael Glaser, but I will primarily be focusing on the 2025 Edgar Wright movie. And so, yeah, this book was published in 1982, but he originally wrote the book in 1973. And then, as time passed, King became a published author. He had created the persona of Richard Bachman. And then in 82, he decided to publish this old story he had written under the Bachman name. And then he was outed as being Richard Bachman in 1985. So this was one of the last books he wrote under that name without people knowing the truth. And it's funny because when the guy bought the rights for the 80s movie, he was surprised at how expensive it was because Richard Bachman was an unknown author. That wasn't a big deal. And so he thought it would be cheap. And so he was confused by this. And so the publishing house or whoever it was that sold him the rights, they had to tell him like, it's actually Stephen King, but keep it a secret. But that's why it's more expensive. So I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think if you're a fan of Stephen King, definitely give this book a read, especially if you liked The Long Walk. I think this one is worth reading. The two have some similarities in that they take place in a time when America is living in this dystopian version of the world, and they have some overlapping themes as well. And The Long Walk, of course, the reason I'm bringing that up is because that is also a Bachman book that was recently adapted. But between the books, The Running Man and The Long Walk, I do prefer The Long Walk, but yeah, The Running Man is still one I would recommend. And it's also like a competition similar to The Long Walk too. So yeah, some similarities there. And then the 80s movie is admittedly a terrible adaptation in just every way possible. It's just so unfaithful. And yet, when you just see it as its own thing, it's still so bad and so cheesy, and yet I had so much fun watching it, and it was so entertaining. And also it helps that it's directed by my man Starsky, which I thought was awesome. If you've seen my video for the 70s Salem's Lot miniseries, you will know that I am a fan of the TV show Starsky and Hutch, and Paul Michael Glaser played Starsky. So I had no idea he had directed this until the credits were rolling at the start of the film. So I thought that was so cool. And even though I think this movie would be considered camp, because again, it's just so over the top and so ridiculous. But I do think that was intentional, and I think that's just, I don't know, I think Glaser purposefully was making a movie that he knew was just so cheesy and silly. And then the new movie I also quite enjoyed, and I would recommend seeing it in theaters if you are able. I do have my critiques of it, but for the most part, I did like it a lot and I would recommend it. And it is a more faithful adaptation, which the 80s movie, again, is so unfaithful that they set the bar pretty low as far as that goes. So yeah, this one is much more faithful to the book. But I also like it because they do incorporate some things from the 80s movie. They also have Arnold on their New Money. He's the face of the New Money, which I thought was funny. But yeah, I do like when adaptations that are remakes do this, and it made me think of the Del Toro adaptation of Nightmare Alley because that was more faithful to the book, but he also incorporated things from the original film, and that's what we have here with Running Man. And then I love the cast. Glen Powell, I think, is fantastic. And I just want to brag a minute and say that I watched Scream Queens back when that show aired, and I thought Glen Powell was great in that. And so I feel like, I know it's such a dumb thing to be proud of, but I'm kind of proud of the fact that I was a fan of Glen Powell before he became so well known. But yeah, he's fantastic. He's great in these action films because of the physicality he has. But then he also has such charisma, and then he also has great comedic timing, and there is a lot of humor in this movie. But it still has, it still has some intense scenes, and so it is a different tone than the book. But yeah, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself because I wish it was a bit edgier, but we'll get there. But anyway, I'd recommend all three of these for different reasons. But yeah, I did like all three of these. And from here on out, I will now get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. Oh, and I will first talk about the new movie and the book, since the new movie is more faithful. And then in the end, I will share some thoughts on the 80s movie. So in both, Ben Richards is our main character, and he is married with a toddler daughter, which is rare because the work he has to do, because they are very low class, they are very poor. And so the work that they have to do causes men to become sterile. So the fact that his wife was able to give birth to a baby is a miracle. However, their baby is very, very sick, like deathly sick, because she has the flu. And they can scrape enough money to get like cheap street drugs, but the medicine that will really save her is the more official pharmacy drugs. However, those are too expensive and they don't have the money for it. And Ben can't get work because he has been fired so many times for insubordination. And in the movie, they also add that he has been blacklisted because he stood up for his fellow workers because the environments they work in are so poor. And so because he was doing that, trying to fight the system, he has been blacklisted. But yeah, basically, we see that he is just such an angry person, and in the book especially, he was very angry. He had a huge chip on his shoulder. He had such attitude. He had such problem with authority. And while I was reading the book, he definitely is someone that I didn't particularly like. And I do think King did a good job at writing a very flawed main character, again, who I didn't always like, and yet I was rooting for him, right? But yeah, there were times when I'm just like, calm down, guy. Like, why are you being so over the top right now and being so rude and so difficult? And yet I think it is accurate because considering the life he's been raised in and the current situation he is in his life with his daughter dying, his daughter, it's a miracle she even exists. And his wife is having to turn tricks in order to make money to buy medicine. And so it makes sense that he's just so filled with anger and is so difficult and rude and has such attitude. And the movie does keep much of this the same. He is an angry person, but I would say they still made him a bit more likable. Also, his wife in the movie is a waitress, and people will make remarks about her being a sex worker, but they say that as a way to insult him and try to get him angry, because in the movie, she doesn't do sex work at all, and she is just a waitress. Whereas, yeah, in the book, she did resort to that, and I liked that detail in the book because they are so destitute, right? They are so poor, they are so in need. And so it makes sense that when you're in that situation, especially when you're caring for a child, you got to let go of your pride and do what you got to do. And so I did like that detail in the book, but it is a change they made for the movie. Also in the movie, his wife was absolutely stunning. She was also in Sinners, by the way. And I get someone can be poor and still be beautiful, but my problem is that she looked so healthy and put together and perfect. And you could say the same thing about Glen Powell, to be fair, but her in particular, she just had this glowing skin, beautiful hair, pearly, perfect teeth, and just everything about her. I just was not feeling that she was a poor, destitute woman in a dire situation. Like, she looked completely healthy and wonderful. And so if I'm nitpicking, I feel like they could have made her look just a tad bit more rough around the edges. But then also the movie, they work so hard to tell you how Ben Richards, his family means everything to him, and like they're his drive, like they're his world. And so on one hand, you can tell they're trying so hard to make the audience see that. And yet I wish they worked harder in making the audience feel it, because I wish we spent more time with them at the start so we could really feel their connection and their chemistry and the love they had and what a big deal this is, right? But to be fair, in the book, we didn't spend a ton of time with the wife either, and yet we do get their backstory and how they got married young. And so in some ways, I felt like I knew her better in the book than I did in the movie. But yeah, on one hand, this isn't a book about her. I understand that. And yet, yeah, I guess I wish we spent more time with them at the start so that we could really feel the motivation behind Richard's actions. Because yeah, his daughter needing medicine is what leads him to sign up to be part of one of these game shows they play on the freebie. And the freebie is basically the TV, but it is the law that a freebie be in every home. And not just that, but they are just literally everywhere. And in the book, there was even a detail we learn where the government, they tried to pass a law to make it illegal to turn off the freebie. However, there's some roadblocks, and so they don't end up being able to pass that law. But that's how much the government wants people to just be zombies watching TV. But yeah, on the freebie, they play a variety of game shows that people in Ben Richard's situation, who are poor and desperate, they will sign up to be part of these shows in order to win money. However, with each of these shows, there is like for sure a chance you are going to be injured. And with some of them, there is also the threat of death. And The Running Man is the TV show where you have the potential to win the most money. And yet, it is also a guarantee that whoever is part of this show is going to die. But when Ben Richards goes to apply to be on these TV shows in order to get money for his daughter, he wants to be on one of the less lethal TV shows because his wife needs him, right? However, once he is going through all of the testing, they determine that he is the ideal candidate for the Running Man. His stamina, his motivation, his anger, his attitude. Not only does he seem like someone who could last longer than usual and therefore boost ratings, but also his attitude is going to make for good TV because people are going to love to hate him, essentially. And by the way, I should explain the premise of the show, The Running Man. So again, someone who is poor and destitute signs up to be on one of these shows, and when they are selected for the Running Man, they are just let out into the world and they are given money to try to last 30 days without being caught by the game show hunters, but also civilians can kill the Running Man as well. And even if they don't kill them, civilians will get money if they report sightings of the Running Man. And so basically there's a nationwide manhunt going on for this person, and they or their family get more and more money the longer they are able to last. And the grand prize is like, ooh, if you last 30 days, you get $1 billion. But no one has ever lasted 30 days, and they are always killed before that. And there is a studio with a live audience that reports on what is happening, and the host is a guy named Bobby. And in the movie, he is played by Coleman Domingo, who I thought was absolutely wonderful in the role. I love him so much, and he was great here. And in both, there is another contestant as well named Laughlin, played by Katie O'Brien in the movie, who I also love. And so in the book, he and Laughlin are let out as the two running men, and Laughlin ends up being killed by two local kids. And in the movie, this is the case as well, although Laughlin is a woman in the movie, man in the book. But yeah, in both, they end up being killed. And in the movie, they also have a third contestant, a guy named Jansky. But he is just very young and naive and foolish, and he gets killed on like the second day or something. And with him, it reminded me of The Long Walk because, spoilers for The Long Walk, the part when McFreeze, he says something about how he thought the first time the gun was fired, it would be revealed to be not real. Like, no one's actually gonna die. The denial people have going into these things. And yet the reality is that, yeah, you are gonna die. And so we see that in The Long Walk, but also here, as soon as Jansky is caught, he is killed. But he came across like someone who didn't actually take in the reality of what he was being part of. And Jansky was in the book, but he was an alternate. So in case something went wrong early on with Ben or Laughlin, they would have put Jansky in. However, because Laughlin and Ben Richards become the running men for the TV show, Jansky is never even part of it. And in both, before Ben goes out and starts the game show, the network showrunner, the guy behind it all, his name is Killian, he tells Ben in both to stick to your own kind because you'll last longer that way, meaning other poor people. And this ends up being very wise advice that comes in handy because this is what Ben does, and it does help him last longer. And so the first person who helps him is someone he knew in normal life, a guy named Molly, and this guy helps him get a fake identity to help him, get out of the town he is currently in, the state. And in the movie, there's this side detail where when he shows up, Molly is upset and he's like, hey, you didn't need to do this because I was literally going to offer you a job today to be my partner. But now here you are on The Running Man and you've ruined it and now you're going to die. And this was not the case in the book. And then the next person to help him, so he's found by this young kid, and the kid introduces him to his older brother named Bradley. And so Ben stays with their family for a little while. And in The book specifically. So Bradley has a sister with cancer and she's like 3 years old. And so Ben is like, she has lung cancer. And so he's like, how did a 3-year-old get lung cancer? And Bradley tells him that the air is toxic and the network knows this and they do sell nose guards, but they are crazy expensive. However, Bradley has figured out how to make nose guards for super cheap. And so it's this whole conspiracy where the network purposefully sells nose guards for way more money than necessary in order to keep the rich people alive and to kill the poor people. And then also Bradley is part of this underground group of people that are trying to expose the truth about the network and the government and trying to take it down. And when he tells Ben about the nose guards and the toxic air and the network, what they're doing, he has to report in every day for the Running Man and submit these videos. And so in his videos, he talks about this and he shares the information. However, of course, when the network gets the video, they don't actually play it and they mute his audio and put different voiceover over it. However, in the book, lip readers can see what Ben had been saying, and so word does get out despite the network's attempts to censor him. And then he leaves Bradley's house and Bradley sets him up to meet up with another guy he knows again who is trying to take down the network. His name is Elton. And so in the book, Bradley helps him reach Elton and no drama happens. He just goes to Elton's house. Whereas in the movie, Bradley, again, he has connections with people trying to take down the network, but he also has this video, this super secret video he releases where he's dressed, he covers his face so no one knows who he is. And it's basically a YouTube channel where he breaks down the Running Man. And so he analyzes the show like crazy. But he also is trying to expose the network and expose the truth about the network. Because here too, his little sister has cancer. And again, it's because the network is poisoning the air and they don't care who it kills. But the movie does not have the nose guard plot line. But we do see Ben yet again talking about this in the video he submits. But in the movie, the network is really good at making CGI fake videos. And so there is no lip readers in the movie because they just released their own version of the video that looks very realistic of Ben just saying crazy things. And then from here, once again, Bradley sets Ben up to meet his friend Elton. However, in the movie, when he is leaving Bradley's house, a car chase happens and these motorcycle people are trying to get him. However, ultimately, he is able to find his way to Elton. And then in the book, so he meets Elton and he has a mom living with him who is all in on the freebie and she believes everything the government, the network is telling her. And so when she sees Ben, she's like, he's a murderer, he's evil. And so Elton has to try to tell her no, mom, calm down, it's fine. However, ultimately, she does report Richards. And so then this is when the car chase happens in the book, is when he's leaving Elton's house. And ultimately, Richards is able to get away. But in the book, I'm just why would Elton agree to have Richards in his home with his mom where he knows she is going to see him and he knows that she has drank the Kool-Aid? So why did he think she wouldn't try to report him? It kind of made no sense. And we do see it, he has a love for his mom, even though they have totally different views on what's happening in the world. But I guess he just assumed the best of her, not fully wanting to realize how far in it she was. But in the movie, they make some changes to this and also make a bit more sense, because when Richards shows up, the mom is in a separate room watching TV and that's taking all her attention. But he also tells Richards she's hard of hearing. So he's like, she's not going to hear anything we say. It's fine. And then also in the movie, Elton lives in Derry, Maine, which I thought was a nice touch. And the mom thinks part of the house is haunted. So he's like, she doesn't even come to this part, so you're fine. And so in the movie, it makes sense. He genuinely thought his mom just wouldn't notice Richards was there. And it makes more sense. But then his mom eventually does see Richards, and she is threatening to press the button that will call the local police and therefore alert the game show hunters. But they are trying to talk her out of it when then Elton presses the button, because he actually does want a confrontation with the local police because they turned on his father because he had been a cop. However, he would not comply when the government made changes to the police. And so now Elton has it out and wants vengeance on the local cops. And so he calls them to the house and he has set up all sorts of traps that kills the cops. And I just thought the scene was fantastic. I loved it so much. But also it shows how reckless Elton is. And when they go to the underground escape, because he's been thinking they have enough time, but when they go to the underground escape, one of the hunters is already there and he stabs Elton. However, Elton does not die. And from here, they are able to get out on this four-wheeler thing. And so they're driving, trying to get away in the four-wheeler. And Elton has a bunch of explosives. And so it's like, oh, he's going to do something with the explosives so that Richards can get away. But then Elton is shot in the head and he dies. And I didn't expect him to live, but I was shocked when he died in this moment. I thought, his diversion was going to work and he'd go out with a bang, And so, yeah, I was shocked when he died in this moment. And this is one of those intense scenes where you're just like, whoa, like, okay, like this movie is going there. And he was played by Michael Cera. And I just thought he was fantastic. I loved everything with the Elton character. I just thought, yeah, he was just so good. And so I was sad that he died in such an abrupt way, but I also loved what a surprise it was. Again, I didn't think he would live, but the way he died just really took me by surprise. But from here, shortly after, Richards then hijacks a car and takes the woman hostage who is driving. And she is a woman named Amelia. In the movie, she's like a wealthy 20-something-year-old, whereas in the book, she was a wealthy woman, but she was a bit more mature and she had a husband and kids. And once again, in both book and movie, she watches the freebie and she fully believes what the freebie tells her about people such as Ben Richards and how he's just depraved and a criminal and a murderer and he's violent and horrible. However, over the course of her time with him in the car, she hears his side of the story and starts to believe him. But what really makes her start to believe him is when she witnesses things for herself. Because in the book, they show up at a checkpoint and the guards try to shoot her in an effort to also get Ben. And she's like, what? Like, why would they try to kill me? And then also in the movie, she sees them playing fake footage of herself. And so she's just like, wait, what? Like, that's not me. I'm not doing that. And so while she is with Richards, she just has a number of experiences that make her realize she is being manipulated and the freebie is lying to her. But in both, Ben pretends that he has a bomb in his pocket and Amelia plays along with this. And so using that, he is able to get access onto a luxury plane. And so ultimately, we end with Ben, Amelia, Evan McCone, the lead hunter for the game show, and 3 pilots on this luxury plane. And in the book, over the course of this whole experience, Amelia is just a mess. Right, understandably so. And in the movie, she's been through a lot as well, and she's very emotional. But in the book, this was another one of those really dark elements, was just seeing what was going on with Amelia, right? And to jump ahead a bit. So ultimately, a ton of people are killed on the plane, and she is in shock. Like, she can't even do anything because, again, just everything that has happened. And he wants to save her, so he tells her to put on a parachute so she can jump out of the plane. And in the book, she is so in shock that he has to punch her and then threaten to shoot her in order to get her to do this, which again was pretty intense. But then there's also a part in the book when, before this, to jump back again, before he has killed everybody on the plane, we read this section, which I thought was just so, again, just how intense and horrible the situation is in the book. But we read, Amelia Williams cried steadily in her seat long after the time when all tears should have gone dry. He wondered indifferently what would become of her. She couldn't very well be returned to her husband and family in her present state. She simply was not the same lady who had pulled up to a routine stop sign with her mind all full of meals and meetings, clubs and cooking. She had shown red. He supposed there would be drugs and therapy. He wanted to go to her, comfort her, tell her that she was not badly broken, that a single crisscrossing of psychic band-aids should fix her, make her even better than she had been before. But yeah, clearly she will never be better than she was before. And so in the movie, this was one of those changes in order to make it more lighthearted, is like, yeah, you can see Amelia's been through it. And yet by the end, she's like, I'm on your side. I want to help you. And she hasn't been as broken down and ruined by this whole thing the way she had been in the book. But to jump back in time to when they first get on the plane, so they are taken off, they are flying, when Killian does a video call and he tells Ben Richards that he knows the bomb is a hoax, so he can drop the act. And he then offers Richards a job as the new leader of the hunters and tells him also that his wife and daughter are dead. In the movie, he's like, yeah, know that hunter you killed? he was really close to McCone. And so McCone went to where your wife and daughter were and he killed them. But in the book, it was actually like some intruders, some prowlers came around and killed his wife and daughter. But in both, he now thinks they are dead. And so this is obviously a huge blow. And so he turns off the video chat and is taking the time to gather himself. And then I'm going to talk about the book ending before then moving on to the movie. So from here, he calls Killian back and he tells him that he will take the job. And so Killian is like, sweet, have the plane fly to LA and we are going to stage a fake execution because for the sake of the show, we need to act like you die. But then after that, you will actually be the lead hunter. But Richards, of course, was lying when he said he would take the job. And after this, he then kills McCone. He kills the 3 pilots who the pilots were just innocent men. And so I was kind of surprised he killed them. I thought he would give them parachutes like he does with Amelia, but no, he kills the pilots. But before he kills them, they had told him how to set the plane to autopilot where it will just fly wherever you tell it to. And so he sets the plane to fly into the network building. And he also has been shot in the gut at this point. So he is sitting in the cockpit dying when he flies right into the network building and he and Killian make eye contact before the whole thing explodes and they both die. And also, by the way, Richards lasting as long as he did and his personality, he had caused an uprising amongst the lower class. And so we can assume that what has already begun is only further expanded based on his and Killian's deaths. And so it's a very dark ending, and yet there is a bit of hope to it. Whereas in the movie, so after he learns about his wife and child's death, McCone, we find out that he had been a former Running Man contestant himself. He is the one who had gone the longest back in season 1, and then Killian made him the same offer that he has now made Richards. And McCone tells him, though, he's like, what Killian told you, that I killed your wife and daughter, that's a lie. But he's also like, ultimately, whether your wife and daughter are alive or not, it doesn't even matter, because if they're alive, that's almost worse because Killian can torture them in front of you in order to get you to do what he wants you to do. And this implies that this is what McCone had gone through himself. And so you do pity McCone in the end, but ultimately Richards does kill him. And then he sends Amelia out on the parachute and he gives her a backpack full of the flyers that Elton had made. Because Elton, again, he was part of this underground resistance group and he had flyers about Richards, using Richards as like the face of the revolution. And I like the scene in the movie when Richards like rubs up against this and he's like, I'm not part of a revolution. I'm just a guy who's trying to do what I can for my wife and child. But Elton says, why not be both? Why not be the face of a revolution and be the guy who's trying to help your wife and child, you know? And so I did think that was a good scene in the movie. But anyway, Killian then calls and he is live on air for the finale of The Running Man. And Killian makes him an offer to be a hunter. And they also say like, oh, McCone killed your wife and kids. So they're using this narrative in order to get the audience on Richard's side as well. That way they will want to see him as the new hunter. However, Richards turns this down and then he gives a speech about how he has never felt like a hero and he's just a desperate man. And he says, everybody, you just need to turn off the freebie because they are using the freebie to make us fight amongst ourselves and to cause division when really we need to be taking down the people in charge. And yet the freebie, they're just using that to manipulate us and brainwash us and distract us from the reality. However, as soon as he started talking, Killian tells him that they cut to commercial because, of course, they don't want people hearing what he had to say. And then from here, they make fake footage of Ben claiming that he is going to crash into the network building and blow them all up. And so the plane can be remote controlled. And so Killian causes the plane to head that way, but then they have a bomb go hit the plane so that the network can be made to seem as the heroes who are saving the citizens inside the building from being hit by this airplane. And so that is the finale of this season's The Running Man, is Ben dying in this explosion. But then from there, the movie cuts to Bradley, right? Because he has his videos he makes. And so we see one of his videos and he's saying how the network has told us that Bradley died, the network has told us that Richards died, but Bradley suspects that he could still be alive because there was like an escape pod that disconnected from the plane, and he's like, I think Richards was in there and I think he's still alive. And then also the black box from the plane crash was found, and so people heard the speech Richards gave about turning off the freebie. And so again, a revolution, kind of an uprising, had already started based on Richards staying alive so long, but then this black box audio inspires like a further rebellion, and people are not watching the freebie anymore. But yeah, and so then this video ends with Bradley being like, you know, even if Richards died, he still started this revolution, but he could be alive. Also, his wife and daughter could be alive as well, because we know the network lies, so who knows? They could be out there still. And then from here, we then cut to his wife and daughter in a grocery store, because yes, they are still alive. And then Richards shows up and he is reunited with his family. And then we cut to the studio and the audience, you know, Killian wanted to turn Richards into a star and to increase his ratings. And it worked a little too well, because now Richards is all the audience wants. And so Bobby quits because he's like, I can't compete with that. And then from there, chaos ensues in the studio. Richards shows up and he has a gun to kill Killian, when we then cut to the credits. So we can assume he shot Killian, and that is how the movie ends. And so to share some thoughts on this movie ending. So part of me, once he gets in the car with Amelia, that stuff felt a little rushed for my taste, but I can let it slide. And then the reveal that McCone had been a previous contestant and all of that, that is unique to the film. But I was on board with this. I liked it. But what had me starting to be a little skeptical is when they took the book ending of Richards flying into the network building, but they twisted it and had it be Killian's idea and it's all fake. And then they just stop him before he can hit the network building. And yet he still dies in the explosion. That happening, I wasn't sure what to make of that. But then we switched to the conspiracy video where he's like, maybe he's alive, maybe he isn't, I don't know. That part I could get on board with. And also them keeping the book ending and yet manipulating it by being like, yeah, it's the book ending, but Killian is still alive. And it was Killian's idea. And so the thought that it was Ben's idea was the network tricking us. Like, that's on theme, because the network is always spreading misinformation and lying. And so them twisting the ending in that way, I could get on board with it. It's on theme, it's fitting. And even if Killian is alive, Ben still did start a revolution, you know, so it's still a positive ending while still being ambiguous about what happened to Ben and his family. And so with that, I could be okay with. But what I really didn't like is the last 5 minutes, when then we see that not only are his wife and daughter still alive, we see that Ben is still alive and he's reunited with them, and then he shows up to kill Killian. I just hated this section right here. And it had the vibe of, like, I'm imagining someone reading the original script or seeing an early cut of the film, like a producer or someone, and them being like, no, we need something more uplifting. We need something more definitive. So you need to change this ending. Like, that is what I would bet happened. But who knows? Maybe Edgar Wright, maybe this is the ending he always had in mind. But it had the vibe of too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Because it was also just such a mess, the way it's all clobbered together there in the end. And so I was really enjoying this movie up until, like, what was that? Like the last 10 to 15 minutes. It just got worse and worse for me. And so I still liked the movie. I would still highly recommend it. But man, I just really did not like that ending. And it's not that I needed it to be as dark as the book was, because to be fair, this movie, they changed the tone and they made it much more fun and comedic. And yet it is still possible to make a comedy that still has intense, tragic moments. You know, Jojo Rabbit is a great example of this. That movie is very funny, and yet it's one of those movies that makes you laugh before it makes you cry. And when movies do that, the emotional moments are so much more impactful, because you'd had your guard down and you were laughing a second ago, and then something horrible happens and then you're just like, wait, what? So it can work so well when it's done right. And so that is what I thought they were going to do here. And scenes like when Elton is shot, that was so shocking and intense. And I thought it was them like trying to set the stage for like dark things to come, you know, like this isn't going to be a happy ending. So we're going to put this scene in here so you can get a taste of where this is going. And yet that's not what happened. And instead they tacked on a happy, cheesy ending that I just did not like. Also, by the way, I thought of the movie Caught Stealing because based on the trailers, people thought that movie would be an action comedy, and it is. And yet, it gets darker than people expected. And so that's another example of a movie can balance those tones, right? You can have an action comedy that gets surprisingly dark and it can work. And so, yeah, I wanted this movie to have more of an edge to it. I wanted it to have more of a bite. And there's a way to do that while still leaning into the comedy, and yet that just ultimately is not what happened. And so it left me pretty disappointed in the ending. But I did want to talk a bit about how this reminded me of modern day things. First of all, it's such a sad US cliche to have a story be focused around the fact that people can't afford healthcare, right? This is not the first story that is about that. By the way, the book, written in 1973, published in 82, it is set in 2025. And same with The Long Walk, that is set in a dystopian future. And so it's crazy how the world we're living in, it makes these dystopian stories feel so timely. But yeah, American healthcare system is so bad, and yet I don't see it changing anytime in the near future. And yeah, just this whole premise happens because Ben needs medicine for his baby, and seeing how desperate people in the co-op, the slums, are for medical help, it's ironic and perhaps on purpose that when Jansky is caught in the film, he is talking to a cashier, and we see the video footage, and it was reminding me so much of the video footage from Luigi last year. And again, maybe this was intentional, or maybe it's a crazy coincidence, but there are some parallels there. And Luigi, obviously, there was a manhunt for him after that happened. And then, kind of like in Running Man, citizens can report if they find the running man. And that is what happened with Luigi, as someone at a McDonald's reported seeing him, right? So yeah, just could be coincidence, but maybe it was on purpose. And then also game shows, of course, have been around for a long time, but through the decades, they have just gotten more and more extreme. And oftentimes, I mean, it depends. Some people who are part of these game shows are just doing it because they want to. But some of the more extreme situations, people only agree to do that generally if they just are desperate for money. And so they're hoping they'll just get lucky and win this game show. But then also on top of that, through the decades, reality game shows have become more and more fake because there's a reality to it, these are real people, and yet the way the producers, the way the people behind the scenes are manipulating the storyline in order to make for good TV. We see that here in The Running Man, and I loved the part when Killian tells him, yeah, when you go out there in front of the audience, really say what's on your mind, really give it to them, be wild, because he wants him to be someone people love to hate, And so he is trying to manipulate the situation and really encourage that in Ben, and we get that in book and movie. But this made me think of Mr. Beast because he had a competition show on his YouTube channel, and there was a guy who was made out to be the villain, and I was watching him behind the scenes, and Mr. Beast had been talking to that guy, and he was telling him what you're doing is great, keep it up. And so he was encouraging this guy to be a jerk, but also did this guy think of himself? Was he realizing that that is how he was going to be portrayed? The way reality TV, reality game shows, we don't know these people in real life. We're just seeing the narrative that the producers are molding this into, and they're just manipulating the information in order to make for good TV. But then speaking of good TV, so in both, he has those videotapes he needs to film. So every Running Man, you have to report a video every single day. And Killian tells him, if you don't submit the videotapes, you don't get paid. So you'll still be hunted down and yet you'll get no money for it. So these videotapes are crucial. However, in the movie, he realizes how the network isn't going to let me win. And he just sees what a chump he is in this whole situation. And so he stops mailing the videotapes because he realizes they want the videotapes because it makes for good TV. That's why they care so much about it. And so he's like, why am I helping them by mailing the tapes? And so at one point in the film, he just leaves the tape for the hunters to find, and he says, you mail it. And so I thought that was a great scene in the movie. But in the book, he does continue mailing the tapes. However, in the movie, in the book, what goes on with that is they claim, no matter where you mail the tapes at, they're not trackable. So we can't find you based on the tapes. And yet, he's like, I find that hard to believe. And so Bradley helps him create a system where he is going to send the tapes to Bradley, and then Bradley will then mail them from different locations. However, this plan never even pans out because then the stuff with Elton goes south, and then Bradley, I don't know if it's ever said, but it's highly implied that he ends up being killed. And so, just everybody who helps him and his wife and kids end up dying in the book, which again added to the dark nature of the entire story. But to now move on to the 80s movie, which isn't dark at all. So here in this version, Richards had been in the military, but when he is told to shoot down a bunch of unarmed protesters who simply want food, he tells his superior that no, he won't do it. And this leads to a scuffle, and he is arrested and put in military prison. And then he and 2 other prisoners are able to escape. And then from there they part ways, and Richards goes to like his brother's apartment, but his brother has been evicted and got in trouble for doing something. And now it's this hot new lady who is in his apartment, and he walks in on her when she is working out while wearing her lingerie, which was just so silly. Granted, it's not lingerie, it's like a slip thing she wears underneath her clothing, but it was, lacy and sexy, and so that was kind of silly. But anyway, he kidnaps her, and they go to an airport, and he's trying to escape, but she turns him in. However, he had told her enough about what was going on with himself and how the TV is lying about him that she got curious, and so she starts looking into what really happened with him to cause him to be arrested when she is caught snooping, and then she gets put into the show The Running Man, because Killian, here he is the showrunner, but he is also the host. He specifically requests Richards because this show needs a boost, and he can tell by Richards' body and attitude that he will make for good TV. And so Richards and the 2 guys he escaped with are put into the Running Man games, and then later Amber, the woman he kidnapped, is put in as well. But none of them applied for this like they do in the book. And ultimately, the 2 guys end up dying, but then Richards and Amber stay alive, and they are able to beat the system, and they expose Killian for the liar he is, and they end up killing him. And it all ends happily in the end with him giving Amber a kiss and them walking off into the sunset, basically. And when reading the book, I knew the 80s movie. I had heard that it was pretty bad. And so when reading the book, I was like, I bet the 80s movie is going to have a romance between Ben and the woman he holds hostage. And in the book, there is nothing romantic about what goes on between them. And again, it's super intense and heavy and dark. And yet, I was right. And the movie totally changes this dynamic and turns it into a romance, which again is just so cheesy and cliche. But I do kind of love how the game is shown because it's very different from the book. He isn't out in the world trying to not be caught. Here, he is in a contained space, and the stalkers, not hunters, are sent out to try to kill the contestant, but Richards ends up outsmarting them and killing them off instead, or at least injuring them. And literally every single time after he gets rid of one of them, he says some horrible pun because they all have like a theme, all of the stalkers. And so he makes some horrible pun based on what their costume was. Again, so cheesy, so silly, so stupid, and yet I really loved it. And I have to talk about Richard Dawson because he is most famous for hosting Family Feud. And he plays Killian, who again is also the Bobby counterpart here as well. And I just thought it was so fantastic how they got a real game show host to play this character. And he was perfect. He was just so good. And I also love how they have so much merchandise to go along with the Running Man and how he interacts with the audience. I just loved all of this in the old movie. It was just so good. But yeah, like I said, ultimately in the very end, Richard shows up and he reveals the truth about what a horrible person Killian is. And he also plays the real video that shows that he is innocent and he is a hero. And then, the studio revolts against him and Killian ends up being killed. And a very happy ending. But when it comes to book versus movie, so this is of course between the new movie and the book, since the 80s movie is just doing its own thing. So ultimately, I will just say that the book wins in large part because of the ending. If the movie ending had even just been slightly different, this would be a close call because I liked the movie so much up until that last bit. Again, we have a great cast. It's very entertaining. I was enjoying it the entire time. And then the ending happened, but I feel like I've gone on about the ending long enough. You don't need to hear me talk about it more, but I would still recommend the movie, even if, if you're a fan of the book, you should still watch it. But yeah, ultimately in the end, the book does win. And this isn't like my favorite King book. And even with Richard Bachman, I preferred The Long Walk. So it's not like the book was so fantastic. It's just the ending was far better than the ending we got in the movie. So that really is what it comes down to for me when I say the book wins. So yeah, anyway, that wraps it up for The Running Man. Let me know your thoughts. What did you think of the new movie? And also, what do you think about the 80s film? Did you enjoy it as much as I did? I could see myself watching both of these movies again because I really did like them a lot. But yeah, anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not already. And I have covered all 4 of the 2025 Stephen King adaptations. I also have been watching Welcome to Derry and making videos for that. And I also just have a whole playlist for Stephen King. So if Stephen King is what brought you to this video, you can check out that playlist because there is a lot you can watch that I have already done. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.